Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about the updates that are coming from the capital Ukraine, from Kiev. According to information we have, the Ukraine armed forces are ready to agree to territorial concessions in favor of Russia due to fatigue that British magazine The Economist reported, citing Ukrainian military personnel. As an Ukrainian officer with call sign Chechen who trains soldiers pointed out, 70% of the fighters in his unit are ready to give up territory to Russia. And maybe the Ukrainians are already ready to stop the special military operation to complete the Russian requirements and demands, but the Western countries are not ready. For example, we got several reports from Germany, and according to information we have, Germany is preparing for war. The country will increase the number of bunkers and shelters. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates from France and London, from United Kingdom. Discussions over sending French and British troops to Ukraine reignited. As the conflict in Ukraine enters a new phase of escalation, discussions over sending Western troops and private defense companies to Ukraine have been revived. Le Monde has learned from corroborating sources. There are sensitive discussions, most of which are classified, and in light of potential American withdrawal of support for Kiev once Donald Trump takes office on January 2025. And we have several statements from NATO, and as for the NATO statements, NATO discusses preventive precision strikes on Russia. Bureau explained that the organization's first priority is to replenish its weapon stockpiles. He acknowledged that they are currently depleted. We need to invent more in air defense and precision strike systems. Precision strike systems, which is very important. This is a new discussion in NATO, and I am glad that we have changed our attitude to this, he admitted at a conference in Brussels. So this is the situation. Furthermore, we have reports that, according to understanding of NATO countries, Russia's army bigger than 2 years ago, but quality has decreased. This is all about the precision strike on the territory of Russian Federation. So we see that most likely the special military operation and the war will not be finished in 2025. Probably the Russians will be able to achieve just one goal. They will force the United States of America to abandon the conflict, and then Russia and European Union will face-to-face fight on the territory of Ukraine. Maybe even Ukraine will stop participating in the special military operation in the war. Just the countries like Russia and European Union will use the territory of Ukraine for war, but not the Ukrainians themselves, because once again, according to information we have, the Ukrainians are ready to give up territories in Russian favor, but to stop the war on the territory of this state in the eastern part of Europe. Now let's move to the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction, because according to information we have from some pro-Russian resources, the Russian armed forces are advancing towards the town of Mala Takhmachka from the south. According to pro-Russian sources, during the previous night, the Russians managed to improve their positions and basically to reach the outskirts of the former prison in the southern part of Mala Takhmachka. I'll remind you that just yesterday we have adjusted the map in Russian favor to the northeast of Robotyne based on the video that was published by the Ukrainians. I'm telling the truth, the dynamic in this area is very big, very fast, we can say, because several days ago we got also report that the Russians managed to take under control the village of Belagorye. So now we see that the Russians are moving using 3 roads of attack through the fields. The Russians are moving in the direction of Mala Takhmachka, and the Russians are moving probably in the same direction of Mala Takhmachka on the Ukrainian side of the river by the name of Kinska. So this is the situation. Let's wait for additional updates. Most likely they're going to be something interesting in the very near future. Now let's go to the Velyka Novosilka direction. As you can see, we have lots of icons from the territory. And the most important that, according to information from the fields, the Russian army entered the village of Velyka Novosilka from the southeast. And according to pro-Russian mappers, this territory is already under complete Russian control, which means that by the morning of the 26th of November, the Russians secured the farms in the southeast and 2 more complexes of farms in the southeastern part of the settlement. As for the previous farms, they were located outside the city, outside the town, and as for these 2 complexes, complexes. They are already located on the territory of the village of Velyka Novosilka itself. Furthermore, we start receiving first attacks with FPV drones, which means that the Russians established complete FPV drone control over the small town of Velyka Novosilka. We see that there are still bridges, there are still communications with the mainland, and now the Russians are trying to destroy these communications, and most likely when the Ukrainians realize that they have no possibilities to send additional forces on the territory of this pocket, the Russians would destroy the bridge itself. So this is the situation. Once again, according to information we have, the clashes are already taking place in the southeastern part of the settlement. Now let's move further and let's talk about the village of Razdolne. There are very heavy clashes on the territory of the settlement. As for pro-Ukrainian sources, Deep State, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the settlement. At least the Russians control 50% of the settlement, and the next 50% of the settlement are located in the gray zone. So as for pro-Russian sources, they reported that the entire village was captured, and maybe there are several buildings in the most western part of the settlement that weren't captured by the Russians, because there is a stronghold to the west of Razdolne, and Ukrainians using the stronghold continue supporting their forces on the territory of the western part. So now the Russians enter the next phase of battle for the city of Velyka Novosilka. The Russians are trying to take under control this stronghold, and if the Russians are able to take this stronghold under control, this will lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense and supply of Velyka Novosilka direction. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Uspianovka pocket. So we see that the situation has been changed since the beginning, since the previous day. First, we have geolocations. This video was published by pro-Russian sources, and in this video we can see how the Russian units were attacking the village of Ilinka from the northeast and from the east. The Russians were using armored vehicles, personnel carriers, fighting vehicles, tanks, and many other different equipment. The Russians entered the territory of the village from different sides, and as a result of clashes, the Russians most likely managed to take the village under complete control. But as for the geolocations, one of the roads of attack took place exactly along this line. The Russians were entering the village of Vilinka through the farms, and one of the roads of attack took place on the line between the village of Antonovka and Ilinka itself. So we don't know for sure the exact situation with the southern part, but as you can see, we have colored this territory as a contested area, because according to different sources, different mappers, this part of Ilinka was already captured by the Russians. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates that most likely the village of Yelizavetovka was also captured by the Russians. So we are waiting for some videos. If these updates are correct, that means that today, during the day on the 26th of November, we will receive either or both the Ministry of Defense report or the video with the Russians that were raising the flags in these settlements. So anyway, the situation is coming, the clashes are coming, Kuganovka and Veselogay, and these are the last villages before the beginning of the final battle for the Uspianovka stronghold. Now let's talk about the village of Dalny. Today we have additional reports about the Russian progress on the ground along the tree lines in the direction of the company stronghold between the city of Kurakhove and Uspianovka stronghold. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to clean up the tree lines and the fortifications. In this area there were Russian soldiers, and the Ukrainians were storming the Russian positions. We have adjusted the map, we have added some part of the tree lines under complete Russian control, and some part of the tree lines were moved to the gray zone, because it's very difficult to understand whether the Ukrainians managed to restore control or not, when exactly the video was made. So that's why we decided to keep this tree line as a gray zone. Now let's move to the city of Kurakhove. Since the Russian breakthrough in the central part, we haven't received anything that can confirm additional Russian progress. The only thing we know for sure that Ukrainians tried to counterattack the Russians in the central part, and for these purposes they sent a significant number of armored vehicles, but Ukrainians were ambushed around the building that was captured by the Russians, and Ukrainian vehicles, Ukrainian reinforcements was destroyed as a result of Russian FPV drone attacks. Despite the fact that there are still clashes in the central part, Ukrainians realized that they most likely will not be able to hold their lines, so that's why we started receiving updates that Ukrainians from the territory of farms began withdrawing their positions in the direction of the company stronghold between Kurakhove and Uspianovka. At least that was stated by by pro-Ukrainian mappers. They reported that Ukrainians abandoned positions in the farms and that the farms were completely captured and secured by the Russians. Now let's move further. As for the Selidovo direction, we have some changes on the ground according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, but nothing special that we haven't received from other mappers before. We have updates that the Russians began assault operation on the village by the name of Zhovtne. We have several FPV drone attacks. So this village is very small. Most likely during the next 12-24 hours, or maybe during the 26th of November, the village will be captured by the Russians completely. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Torez direction, nothing special. This Chasiv Yar direction, nothing special. Let's talk about the city of Kramatorsk. Today, the Russian sources published the video how they managed to discover the concentration of Ukrainian forces and during the reconnaissance operation with the use of drone, and after that the Russians attacked this territory with the cluster rounds. I'll remind you that we see some changes in approach that the Russians are using in this area. Most likely after the generals and the officers of this direction was dismissed, somebody new arrived in this area, very experienced, very professional. As you can see, first this new general on the Sivers direction was working on the Ukrainian logistic. Now he's working on the Ukrainian temporary deployment points, so I believe that soon there are going to be significant changes in this area. As for the Kupiansk direction, we haven't received anything. The only important thing that I would like to discuss with you that we start receiving updates that also from pro-Russian sources and from pro-Ukrainian sources that the Russian armed forces were forced to abandon positions in the central part of Kupiansk. We are talking about this area under Ukrainian, let's say, pressure, and now the Russians are trying to dig in deeper in the most northeastern part, so here. So most likely during the next several days we're going to receive additional changes on the ground in Ukrainian favor. So once again, most likely the Ukrainians managed to restore control over some positions in the northern, central and northeastern part of the Kupiansk. As for the Russian progress on the ground, we continue receiving updates about expanding of Russian foothold between Dvorechne and Dvorechne. According to pro-Ukraine mappers, the Russians took under control additional forest, and as you can see, according to this information, the Russians are moving and heading towards the village of Dvorechne itself. The Ukrainians are saying that they have significant number of forces here, but now it's very difficult to understand whether the Ukrainians are able to stop or to slow the Russians down. Now let's talk about the Kharkiv direction, because during the previous 48 hours we've been receiving lots of updates of additional Russian progress in the vicinity of Kazachia Lopань. The sources are saying they were saying yesterday, and they repeated the idea today, that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the village of Kazachia Lopань, or town, and to take the settlement under complete control. So summarizing everything, for the previous 48 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions, and currently the line of combat contact goes along this red line. As for now, we haven't received anything that can confirm this, but if this information is correct, sooner or later the Russians will provide us this update. And as for this attack, probably the main purpose of this attack is to cut, if there is going to if there are going to be any attack, the main purpose of possible attack is to cut the railways between the city of Sumy and the city of Kharkiv, and to ruin the Ukrainian logistic, because now the Ukrainians have no problems to redeploy forces between Sumy, Kharkiv and Kupiansk, but by cutting this road, the Ukrainians will start suffering significant losses at least, and problems in the Kupiansk direction, because this is the second priority direction for the armed forces of Ukraine. As for the Sudzha direction, we have some changes on the ground. According to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under control the trenches and the fortifications, the stronghold between the village of Nizhny Klin and Zeleny Shlях. In this video we can see several Russian armored vehicles, few Russian armored vehicles that were attacking the Ukrainian positions, and this video was geolocated, and the place where the Russians landed infantry was also geolocated. So let's return back. So this is the process when the Russians landed, and this is the place where the Russians landed. Russian armored vehicle was moving something like this, and when the Russians reached this line, they landed infantry and began clearing operation of these trenches, and then Russian vehicles returned back safely in the direction of Zeleny Shlях. So we see that the Russians continue their forced counter-offensive operation. Let's wait for additional updates. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, share my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye.